Coming up on Tech News Weekly, the problem with Facebook Messenger Kids. What happens to Bitcoin when someone passes away? Breaking apart the Apple HomePod and the hoops you must jump through in order to watch the Olympics in 4K. All that and more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Weekly is brought to you by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 19, recorded Thursday, February 15th, 2018.
This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Cloud Spanner from Google Cloud Platform. Cloud Spanner is the only horizontally scalable and strongly consistent relational database service. To learn more, visit g.co/getspanner today.
And by Quip. Make a fresh start this year with a Quip electric toothbrush. It cleans like a premium electric brush at a fraction of the cost. Visit getquip.com/twit to get your first refill pack free when you purchase any Quip electric toothbrush.
Welcome to Tech News Weekly. This is a show where we talk to some of the people making and breaking the tech news. I am Megan Maroney.
I'm Jason Howell, and I'm ready.
Okay.
We got some awesome guests today. Let's do this.
In December, we talked about our concerns about Facebook's new messaging app for kids. Now, a group of 100 pediatricians, psychiatrists, educators, and other experts have sent a letter to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg urging him to discontinue the Messenger Kids app. One of the experts who signed that letter is Dr. Jenny Radesky, a developmental behavioral pediatrician and lead author of the latest guidelines on media and young minds from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Welcome to the show, Jenny.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I know that they talk to a lot of experts. They claim to talk to a lot of experts, Facebook did, about Messenger Kids. I'm assuming you were not one of those experts. We're learning now that some of those experts were actually paid by Facebook in different ways. What do you think is the biggest risk for kids and Messenger Kids?
I think what the group of health experts and early childhood experts who signed that letter, I think one of the biggest concerns was just that, is this even necessary? You know, there's enough concerns about the way social media interacts with children's early mental health problems, about the way children interact inappropriately over social media, that really we shouldn't be charging ahead to lower the age at which children start to use social media. We should really be taking a more cautious approach to optimize the use of social media in older kids. And then, you know, for those kids that Facebook says it was trying to help, those like 11 and 12-year-olds who are already on Snapchat or already using Instagram or other social media tools, you know, then maybe start the discussion of helping them enter the social media world in a healthier way. The idea that a 6-year-old or a 7 or 8 or 9 or even 10-year-old is ready to start interacting in a mediated space, you know, over a screen, over text messages it interrupts some of the natural abilities to read each other's nonverbal cues, to know when you've upset someone else, to know when you've crossed a line. That sort of messiness is just so much more likely when you're still immature socially and you still don't even have a well-developed sense of who you are as a person yet at those young ages.
I feel like, obviously this is a hyper technologically driven world that we're living in, more increasingly so. I feel like when we were kids, computers were kind of an interesting thing that some people do. Now we're like surrounded by them, and as adults, our lives depend on them. And so then that transfers to our children, to the kids that watch us interact with technology. Is there, just as playing the devil's advocate, is there any reason to think that by not exposing kids at a young age to technology, that we're not setting them up for success in a world that is driven by it?
I think lots of parents that I've talked to, especially parents from low-income communities, a lot of the parents of my patients, they worry that they're putting their child at a disadvantage by not introducing media at a young age. So one of the things we tried to say in the new American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines was, do not worry that your child will be left behind if you don't buy them an iPad when they're 1 or 2 or, in that young, early childhood age range. So much of computer use or media use is not about how much you can swipe and tap and download and play apps. It's really how you think constructively about how should I use this as a tool? How do I use this to create something that's my mind is making up what I should be doing? I'm not just following what the app developer wants my mind to be doing.
Yeah, right.
So when we're talking about early childhood, like 0 to 5, which was what our AAP guidelines were for, we really wanted to help decrease the hype that parents might feel about, oh my gosh, I've got to introduce this early so my kid can keep up. Now, when it comes to a school-age child whose brain development is ready to start interacting more meaningfully with media, like my 8-year-old does some really cool coding games. He has worked on some early word processing to write stories, to connect and learn new facts from the internet. That's an age when there's so much potential to start using media and computers as a tool for learning and creation. But social media and video chatting is just not that platform, I think, for learning most of the things kids need to learn at those ages. If we want to talk about digital citizenship and what it means to be part of this now hyper-connected community, I don't think that just doing silly faces with cat filters on them and lots of emojis is the way to teach that. I think I've had conversations with the Facebook group that developed Messenger Kids, since our letter came out. They're eager to hear some feedback. They, and I've said some of these concerns to them that is this really the platform to teach some of these skills? Why don't you kind of rethink it? And the letter did say, please pull it back, rethink it, and maybe introduce something else if it's really good. But we really did want them to elicit more feedback from more of us, not just the few researchers that they had interacted with before, that they had funded, but that they had existing relationships with.
So I know with drugs and alcohol, addiction is more likely if you start earlier. Do you think that is the same with technology? And what about tech addiction? Is that real? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't use the word addiction because I'm an early childhood researcher, and we don't have addiction in early childhood. But I'm not going to argue that addiction shouldn't be a term that we use. There's a lot of controversy between media researchers about whether we should or shouldn't use that term. I feel like we should avoid the infighting and probably just decide to study the processes that lead up to such problematic media use that people want to call it addiction. What I'm interested in is all the pathways that lead up to that really heavily problematic media use where kids just feel so compulsive about using, that kids feel so attached to it that it makes them anxious when they leave their phone at home. So those pathways there's so many potential. It could be social anxiety. It could be having a lot of distress and conflict at home. It could be a kid who has early ADHD and trouble with his executive functioning and paying attention. So they really crave all of the attention management that persuasive media does. There is some early research that some of the most problematic media habits in early childhood are really characterized by, number one, it starts to just displace so much other important activities. So sleep, family time, physical activity, getting outside. The other thing that is concerning to early childhood clinicians is when parents use media a lot to calm kids down. Like it becomes the go-to thing that we grab for child distress, for child boredom, for a child who's just skinned their knee in the park and otherwise needs a parent to just help them calm down rather than using an external regulator to help them calm down. So again, this is all in really, really early stages. And I think what I want to emphasize, though, is that one of the reasons I don't really focus on a clinical addiction is that that's one end of the spectrum of the really severe issues that some kids have developed with technology. There's so much other subtle stuff that is going on with these little nudges that persuasive design does to us that might affect the way we consume information, that might affect the way we decide to like fragment all of our time when we're around our kids because we just feel this compulsion to check our email or check the news. And I think that those little subtle interruptions, those little subtle influences on our behavior is also an extremely important thing to study. Last week at the Truth About Tech conference with the folks from the Center for Humane Technology, I think that is a large emphasis of their work and their interest on making sure that, methods of democracy or the way we make decisions, informed decisions about politics, about health, about other things, are not being slowly and subtly changed without us realizing it, just based on some design choices that were meant for advertising but now have been kind of co-opted for other ideologies.
So I speaking of Facebook, I still use Facebook, and I asked about questions that my friends had. Many of them are moms, and they had many questions. And one was the link between the lack of empathy and screen time. Like, I know there have been some studies there. I don't know if they're widespread. What are your thoughts on the link, that link?
There's not a lot. I have done one study that's going to be published soon, looking at the fact that when parents are using tech a lot during parent-child activities, they have a harder time thinking about their child's emotions, their child's motivation. So that's an aspect of empathy. It's called being mind-minded about other people, or being able to mentalize what other people are going through. So that has to do with more the parent-child relationship. There have been studies in adolescents or young adults showing that when a phone is on the table during a conversation, they feel like they got less deep into conversational topics. They felt a little bit less empathy or connectedness with the person across from them. And then there's one study in early childhood that showed that the earlier technology, such as television, videos, or mobile devices, were introduced, the harder time kids had when they reached preschool age with theory of mind tasks. Now, theory of mind is part of empathy. It's how we think about other people's thoughts and motivations and ideas. So there's a little bit of research. I wouldn't say that technology is the only cause of any kind of empathy deficit or difficulty we have with relating to one another. And I'll go back to that idea of, grabbing technology whenever we're bored or distressed, because those are those moments that are really important for our own emotional development, to be able to sit through and sit in and handle and figure out what to do, either if it has to do with our own emotions or our kids' emotions. Kids learn empathy by watching us respond to their emotions, be able to control our own emotions when they're kind of triggering us or riling us up, and then we kind of contain what they're feeling and say, okay, I think this is what you're going through, let me help you handle it. That is a big part of developing empathy in early childhood. I have theoretical reasons to feel like when we are interrupting a lot of emotion regulation with grabbing a mobile device to calm us down or distract us, that we're missing out on those interpersonal opportunities for developing empathy. I still don't have research on that, but it's something that I'm kind of working on, and hopefully we'll have results in the next couple of years.
We also had another question about toys versus tools, which is a big one. And I think like something like Minecraft, which is a great tool for learning. Is there a way that can also be problematic for some kids?
I love Minecraft. My kids play it. I like it because it's not very gamified. It is really unstructured. So the child is given a wide range of things to work with, and the affordances of Minecraft allow the child to really do a vast variety of different things. So that's kind of why I like it. I like more unstructured apps like the Tokaboka apps. Mm-hmm. I like some of the coding apps, that really are more about the child figuring out what to do rather than, the apps I hate are the ones that are just closed loop. Here, match the letters, match the numbers, do this little task that the app is telling you to do. I've had patients, who have ADHD or might have autism spectrum disorder. Like, this is my clinical specialty. So some of those kids have a really hard time transitioning from a highly preferred activity. And media is a highly preferred activity for lots of kids. It's immersive. It's satisfying to be able to create all these cool things. And it's hard to transition away from. So that's probably where parents describe the most kind of tantrums and conflict in their family, is just setting limits around media. When I started to let my 8-year-old play, I made a rule that, he could build up the amount of time he was playing based on positive behaviors during the week. I was using it as a reinforcer. And then at the end, he had to show me what he had created, so that always now he sees Minecraft as this thing that he shares with the people in his family, instead of it being his own little world that he kind of escapes to. So there are ways to use Minecraft in positive ways. I do recommend to most families of young kids that they not do a public server where they're going to be interacting with people they don't know. If you're going to do a server, make sure it's just people that you're connecting with that are known to you, so it's private.
Dr. Radesky, I could sit here and ask you questions for the next 3 hours. Thank you so much. So your research, where's the best place for people to go to follow all the work that you do?
Yeah. So I have a Twitter account, but I'm lousy at it. I'll start tweeting out more of my studies, I promise. But if you just Google me and look at my University of Michigan website, I have a lot of my research posted there. And there will be some YouTube videos posted from last week's conference, the Truth About Tech conference, which I think my session where we were talking about all these early childhood issues and the addiction issues was a good snapshot of some of the health concerns and the developmental concerns. And so, I'm always willing to come back and talk more about the American Academy of Guidelines too, because I feel like parents stress out about this so much. And I'm always eager to keep answering questions. It comes up every day in clinic. So happy to come back anytime.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay. Thanks.
Really nice talking with you. Take care. Thank you. The Bitcoin industry, it's still relatively new, I think we could say. And with that newness comes a whole host of unintended consequences. Namely, in the case of this story, what happens to all that Bitcoin when someone passes away? How is that inherited, if at all? How does inheritance play and apply to those funds? Joining us to discuss this is Nate Lanxon from Bloomberg. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, Jason. Very, very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's awesome to get you back. It's been a while. Yes. Let's start kind of with the predicament. You detail a story in your article that kind of sets the stage. Set that stage for us, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been very interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for quite some time. And one of the things that really intrigues me about digital assets in general is that they are often licenses rather than things people own. With our music, for example, if you buy an app or a song from iTunes, you're buying a license to use that, to listen to that music, which expires on your death usually, as opposed to buying a CD where that CD is a physical thing that you can pass down. And so I wanted to look at how that played out with the likes of Bitcoin and Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies, because like a digital asset, they sort of live virtually. It's not money in a bank. It's not backed by anything that a bank can back money with. And so there've been quite a few articles written about, what to do with Bitcoin or how to prepare your Bitcoin in the event that you die. But no one that I'd seen had really explored this from an actual example. And I spent quite a long time looking around the internet and forums and Twitter and various other places. And I found a gentleman who's based in California. And he had a son who very tragically died in a plane crash going over a canyon in Chico, California. And his father knew that his son had been a very early miner of Bitcoins. When I was talking to him, he sort of explained that he was one of the early people who could mine Bitcoins at home on a fairly standard PC, back when that was possible, before it got to the point where you need server farms that are chewing up all the power in Iceland, which is happening right now. And so he believed that it was quite likely that his son had probably generated quite a few Bitcoins. This is where it gets to part of the issue here, is that he wouldn't know whether his son had hundreds, thousands of Bitcoin, or had spent it all and had just spent it on pizza. And there was a very famous case quite a few years ago where a guy had he basically got on a forum and said, what can I buy for 10,000 Bitcoins or something like that? And a guy from Papa John's Pizza got back in touch with him and said, hey, I'll sell you 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. It's the equivalent of like $40, $50, something like that. But at the height of Bitcoin's peak, when it was just under $20,000 per Bitcoin in December 2017, I looked at the value of Papa John's, the company, and that amount of Bitcoin would have been enough to buy about 10% of the entire business, let alone 2 pizzas. So there's this real sort of silently brewing potentially problem where people have got a lot of Bitcoin. Maybe they don't know they've got a lot of Bitcoin. Maybe have a family member who mined it years ago, forgot about it, sitting on a hard drive somewhere, on a USB stick in a drawer, or on a hard drive in a pile of garbage in Wales in the UK, which is something that also happened. And they've no way of either knowing how much they've got, how much it's worth, and potentially how to access it, even if they can find out. And that's what happened in the case of this gentleman, who he had no way of finding out how many Bitcoins his son may have had. And even if he could find out how many he had, he would have no way of accessing them. And it's sort of, for me, it was a very sensitive story for obvious reasons, but it was also a very important one, because it got me thinking about, are we preparing well enough for this? And are we leaving not only the instructions about how much Bitcoin or Ethereum or digital assets that we have, but also the instructions on how to access them? Because traditionally, if you leave money in a bank or you own a property, it's fairly easy how you go about accessing those, aside from any family disputes over who's entitled to what. And yeah, so it was a very hard story to do, but I think it was an important one.
Yeah, and it's probably going to apply to more and more people as Bitcoin, kind of rests in the spotlight the way it has been very recently. I think there are a lot of new eyeballs and a lot of new money flowing into Bitcoin because people are suddenly awake to the fact that, hey, wait a minute, I think you can actually make some money here. I'm going to dump out all my retirement savings and jump in there. I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea. I'm just saying people are doing it. But that raises the bigger question that I have about Bitcoin, aside from the fact that in many ways Bitcoin is utterly confusing to me, as much as I try to understand it completely. But what happens to the abandoned funds? I mean, this is not an isolated case. We know, outside of this, we know people that have Bitcoin. They just can't find it, where they put it or where they stored it. Is this kind of like gift cards, let's say, where you get a gift card and it goes in a drawer and you forget about it? And I mean, is that this, like, could that be applied to this scenario?
You could think of it a little bit like being a gift card stored in an impenetrable safe. Yeah. With no idea where a key is and there'll be crypto fans out there who will take issue with that sort of analogy, but it's not a million miles away from that to a certain extent. I mean, Bitcoin lives on a thing called the blockchain, and it's quite similar to how the World Wide Web sits on the internet. Bitcoin sits on blockchain, and there are competing services or alternatives to Bitcoin that live on blockchain as well. So essentially, the information about what Bitcoin is assigned to what wallet or address, that all exists on a blockchain. And you can look at the blockchain and you can see how much exists, but the nature, the decentralized nature, the anonymous nature of Bitcoin means you can't look at the blockchain and see who as a person or entity owns it. And it also means that if you have your own private wallet, which is storing your Bitcoin in, and most Bitcoin's stored offline on USB drives and things like that, it means that if you don't have your private keys, or if you fail to pass those keys and instructions onto somebody, then effectively, there's no one that can be appealed to get that back. There's no central authority that's overseeing Bitcoin or the blockchain. There's no one you can go to appeal it. It's if you lose your own access to it, unless you've got it stored with a kind of custodian service, and there are some of those about, then it's basically gone forever, and there's nothing you can do about that.
And I mean, what about like situations like the Mt. Gox, the Bitcoin exchange that was sort of basically out of business in 2014? Like, what happens then? I mean, that's the same thing. There's no one to appeal to?
Basically, yeah. I mean, Mt. Gox was, it's a few years ago now, and Bitcoin has moved on since then in terms of popularity and importance. And there are now a lot of similar services out there, and a lot of them will try and offer it. They'll offer kind of a guarantee, like they will say that if their servers are compromised, they will guarantee that your money, your Bitcoin is insured and is safe. But because unlike a bank, if a bank collapses, and we saw this quite a decade ago, banks do collapse, governments will step in and they will basically underwrite that, and they will do what they can to reimburse people, businesses, all that sort of stuff. The same doesn't really exist with Bitcoin, with blockchain, and it's extremely volatile. We've seen the prices go from being worth a few cents to being worth nearly $20,000 for one. It dropped down to $5,000 only a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago. It's now back up to about, I think it hit $10,000 again yesterday or today. And governments are incredibly skeptical about this because it's just so unpredictable. And even we've seen banks now actually banning their customers from buying cryptocurrencies on credit cards, because the banks are afraid that people will think that it's a safe bet and they don't understand it. And so they'll invest all their money into Bitcoin, and they'll get into great debt. The Bitcoin will drop in value. They can't repay their debt. And then the banks are faced with huge amounts of debt that they're then viable for, because they are regulated and they are overseen and guaranteed. So it's it's something that so many parts of this industry are having to really question how to deal with this. And the way it's beginning to go is that they don't want anything to do with it. Governments don't want to say that it's a currency, and banks don't want you to buy it on their own credit. And simultaneously, it's getting more popular, and there's more cryptocurrencies being created pretty much daily at this point.
And there, and with that rises the need to do what you're talking about, provide legislation or some sort of entity that oversees how this currency is evolving and protecting the people that are getting on the Bitcoin bandwagon. What is the progress there? Like, are we seeing movement in legislation to do this, or we're still very much at the beginning stages of that?
It's a bit past the beginning because governments have to some extent begun to understand at least what it is and why it can have such a big impact. But in terms of legislation being passed, I mean, firstly, it depends on the country that you're in. China takes a very hardline view against a lot of this sort of thing. South Korea also, the US is investigating it as well. And there are sort of several factors at play, and it's probably worth differentiating between a couple of things. So there's a big conversation around Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and some of these other very, very big cryptocurrencies that are worth an enormous amount of money. And then there's another thing going on called an ICO, an initial coin offering. And in many ways, governments, and the US government in particular, have looked at these two things and said, okay, well, we have to do something about this, because there are companies now raising hundreds of millions of dollars through something called an ICO. And this is essentially where a startup, a company, or an institution will say, instead of giving shares of a company, we will create our own cryptocurrency. And then we will sell tokens, they're called tokens, of that cryptocurrency out to investors at a cheap price. And investors will buy those tokens, because if the company is successful, then, and the coins therefore get more valuable, then that's an investment they can cash in on down the line, or trade or something. And traditionally you would buy a share of a company by buying stock in that company, but a stock comes with rights. You have voting rights depending on the class of stock. Whereas with a token, you may not have anything. You have a token. And so the US government is having to look at whether to class an ICO, initial coin offering, or rather to class a token that comes out of an ICO as a security. Because if it's classed as a security, then it puts it much more in line with a traditional stock. And that comes with, a slightly better safety net to some extent, but certainly more oversight and more kind of visibility, if you like, as far as sort of tracking these things goes and keeping companies accountable. So that's something that's happening in the US, but it's extremely unlikely that they would try and class Bitcoin itself as anything like that, because it would basically kill it. No one would want that by design. People want it to be decentralized, and they want it to be free of any kind of government oversight. And there are people. Mario Draghi, he's the president of the European Central Bank, said in a video only this week that he said Bitcoin isn't a currency, but they're very interested in it. So there's this weird dichotomy where they think it's very interesting and very important, but they're like, yeah, that ain't money. But governments are having to basically forge their own path and learn as they go. They're
kind of being forced to look at it through a different lens because of the massive amount of money that's being poured into it. Nate, fantastic, fascinating stuff, and I really enjoyed your article, and it's great to have you back. Nate Lanxon from Bloomberg.com. It's great talking with you, man.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks, guys.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
After the break, alert the people for the ethical treatment of HomePods. Kelsea Weber from iFixIt is back to show us how she took a hacksaw to Apple's latest gadget. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Cloud Spanner from Google Cloud Platform. Now, if you know anything at all about distributed databases, then you've probably come to expect that they cannot be both relational and scalable. But what if you didn't have to make trade-offs? What if you could have a fully managed database service that's consistent, scales horizontally across data centers, and speaks SQL? Now, Google has introduced Cloud Spanner. It's a mission-critical relational database service from Google Cloud Platform. It's built from the ground up, and it's battle-tested at Google for strong consistency and high availability at global scale. Cloud Spanner delivers scalability, high transaction performance, and strong consistency across rows, regions, and continents with an industry-leading 99.999% availability SLA. No planned downtime, enterprise-grade security, multi-language support, client libraries in C#, Go, Java, Node.js, PHP, Python, and Ruby, JDBC driver for connectivity with popular third-party tools. Pricing is simple and predictable. Learn more about Cloud Spanner at g.co/getspanner today. That's g.co/getspanner. I'm going to say it one more time so you get it. g.co/getspanner. And we thank Cloud Spanner from Google Cloud Platform for their support.
So I'm sure you've heard, Megan, everyone is talking about the new Apple HomePod speaker. I think you actually have one, right?
I actually have one. I love it.
Nice. It seems like many people agree that it sounds fantastic. Functionally, perhaps, it's maybe a bit limited at the moment, but what if it needs fixing? To tackle that dilemma, we thought we'd bring Kelsea Weber from iFixIt back onto the show. It's been a little while. Welcome back, Kelsea.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to get you back. You got to pick the HomePod apart. Envious. I'm sure a lot of people are envious of that. By the look of it, it wasn't very easy. Tell us a little bit about your teardown. What did you think?
So I was brokenhearted to do this teardown because when we plugged in the HomePod and turned it on, the sound was great. And I have a really great speaker setup at home and definitely a music fiend. So it broke my heart to take this thing apart. But what was so frustrating about it was that it wasn't easy to get into. I can kind of show you some of the carnage here. So we've got, here's what it would have looked like, kind of looked like beforehand. So you have your HomePod without the skin on the top.
Yeah, no mesh there.
Oh, jacket.
No mesh there. The mesh was easy to pull off. That has a nice drawstring, and we figured out how to get that off, so that was nice. And when it looked like there were some accessible seams for us to go through, those seams kind of led to nowhere. So we ended up having to take an ultrasonic cutter to cut a seam around the top to then open it up and get inside to all the rest of the components in there. But as you can see, it left quite a melty, gross mess on here. But what was interesting was that once we, cut it open and actually got inside, we saw that these rings actually are threaded as if, this top half originally, sat into the HomePod and then just twisted and locked in place. And that would have been, great if there wasn't this adhesive ring along the outside locking it in place. So maybe once upon a time during assembly, you could squish it down and lock it in, but it was definitely not intended to be accessed by the user afterwards because of that adhesive. So that adhesive is what led us to bust out that ultrasonic cutter to get inside.
Wow.
So what can you tell us about I like to call it a mesh jacket, the jacket that's around it. When you cut that open and looked at that, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's, I can kind of show you here. It's this really interesting, the 3D mesh acoustic fabric in a sense, when, it stretches a little bit and it's intended to allow the sound to flow, out of the HomePod without being, obstructed or reflecting back. So to really give you a clear sound without, getting muffled. And then on the inside, and what allows that to happen, there's these coils that line the inside of the fabric. So there's actually a couple layers in here. And if you head over to the HomePod or the HomePod teardown that we've got on our site, we actually cut it initially because we didn't know how to get into it properly the first time around. But we cut it in half, and you can see a cross section of the material that's in there. And it's also intended to keep the HomePod clean. You don't want to get dust inside your speaker, so it allows sound to flow out continuously without any blockage, and then prevents dust and things from getting inside as well.
So I have to imagine on these teardowns, I'm guessing you probably do it a couple of times. It seems like you were alluding to that the first time, you learn things about how it disassembles. Maybe you made a decision to use the ultrasonic cutter around, but in disassembling it, maybe the next time you figure out what the right way was to get in there. When I saw how glued down that center portion was and the extent to which you had to go in order to remove it, which is basically destroy the device in order to take it apart. And then I thought about the fact that Apple can actually fix this for you. It's not cheap, but they can actually do that. In your best guess, how on earth would they get that apart if they didn't do exactly what you did? Was it just like a heat gun on the glue, and maybe that would work the next time around? Because we saw that adhesive around that center ring, maybe Apple has some kind of contraption that, wraps around it to heat that adhesive to soften it, and then maybe some sort of grippy tool to twist and lift it out. They probably have some Leon-esque device out there, the Liam-esque device that they could use for that. But you're right, we do kind of do the teardown a couple different times. So we have, I'm on our video teardown team, and that makes all of the repair videos and teardown videos on our channel. And then we have another technical teardown team that also tears out a device. So we actually get two of them. And typically, the first teardown team will get started early with their device, and then we kind of follow along with them as they go. But sometimes, we get ahead of them and we find a different way to get inside. So while they were trying to get into the HomePod from the bottom, we decided to go in from the top. And that's why we didn't have to cut the mesh on the outside of the device. But manufacturers don't provide documentation to tell us how to get into devices. And that's the whole point of doing this teardown, is to take it apart, to show manufacturers and consumers, to educate them about sustainable design, to talk about repairability, and, of course, just to show the cool gadgets that are on the inside. But that's kind of, unfortunately, the first time you open something up, sometimes that results in you breaking it because you don't know what you're getting into. Yeah. And so if there is a special way to get into the HomePod, I always ask with every teardown, I always ask manufacturers and designers, let us know. But I'm sure it's some kind of crazy contraption that they've got hiding back there. So, yeah.
Whenever I watch one of your videos, I'm imagining like Apple designers watching it, like the people that put it together, and like
yelling at the screen.
Yeah, or just like, I feel like they should just provide you with all the pieces at some point, so you don't have to destroy a perfectly good HomePod. So you are in contact with people at Apple about this kind of stuff?
So, we have some friends, but they're, often very coy and don't give a whole lot of information or anything like that. And we don't typically go to Apple for information on our teardowns. They're not very giving, but we do work with some other people to help us with chip identification and some of the other components. But most of the knowledge that we have has come from us and our experienced teardown team, which is taking apart all kinds of different electronics. So yeah, we've got over 36,000 repair manuals on the site. So that's, a lot of experience that we've had getting into stuff. But you're right, it is frustrating because this $350 speaker, in a sense, at some point is going to become obsolete or break, or is just, even if somebody uses it for, longer than the expected lifespan, it's going to become e-waste at some point. And because there isn't an easy way to get inside, it can't be recycled, it can't be harvested for parts. So it literally just ends up as e-waste in the trash. So I wish, and we always call out to Apple, let us know, either we'll first design devices that are easy to get into and are repairable, because that extends the lifespan of the device. But share the knowledge, if there is a special way or something out there to let us know. But that's why iFixIt is here. We're here to take apart all these things and to educate the consumer so they can fix it themselves in the future.
Have you been able to go back to the HomePod and analyze why it's leaving those rings on wooden tables? Like, do you guys have any guesses on that front?
Well, it did it to ours too, because if you see in the video, we have it on a coffee table, wooden coffee table, and here's the little base in question. And we thought that the ring was caused by like the cleaning product that we had used on the coffee table, but really it wasn't, because everybody else is having a similar problem. Yeah. And it's so crazy because the rubber on the bottom is actually pretty soft, but we are following the rest of the stories. We're going to maybe try to put something together to see, but right off the bat, we don't know why it's making that ring. I love how Apple said, well, just put it on a different surface.
You're putting it on the wrong surface.
You're putting it wrong.
Yeah, you're putting it someplace wrong.
For the record, I had mine on a wood table from Friday afternoon until Monday, and it did not leave. But then I moved it to bring it in here for one of our other shows, and it hasn't been back on that wood table. But I haven't had that problem. But so mine, is it the white ones and the black ones that people are having trouble with? Because mine's white.
Oh, I don't know.
We have the black one. Yeah. This one's the one that gave us the problems. But yeah, and I mean, and I wonder if some of it has to do with weight, because I don't know. Yeah. This thing is pretty beefy, and that's caused by this woofer with this giant magnet on it, and that is what's giving you all that really great bass and that like whole sound. But this thing is heavy, and I'm sure on a wooden table, if this is pressing in there, it could maybe be part of the reason there. But we're actually working on putting it back together and seeing what happens. So tune into our channel and see if we get this thing up and running again. And I doubt that it will sound as crystal clear as the day it came out of the box, but you never know. I mean, if we get this thing, taped back up, maybe it'll sound just as good. So we'll see. I'm
assuming you're not going to be putting back together the one that required the ultrasonic, or did they both require that?
So they both required the ultrasonic cutter. So we're going to try to fit it back in there. There's still some adhesive on there that we can kind of like reactivate to get it all squished back in there. But we're still thinking of a good method to kind of officially like reseal it. Do we need to like re-melt the plastic, or what do we need to do? So we're going to try a couple different things and see what we come up with.
Cool. Well, I'm inspired by what you did with your HomePod. So I'm going to take this HomePod lookalike that our engineer Burke made and tear it apart. It's a lot lighter than I think the original HomePod. It might be easier to open than your HomePod. Megan, so you have the HomePod. What have you thought over the past couple of days?
I love the sound. I don't plan on taking it apart anytime soon. I'm not even. Leo pulled the cord out of his just to see if he could, and I think he couldn't get it back in. So I know some people have been able to pull the cord out, but
so it's not removable. It's not a removable cord.
Well, some people. What do you say?
So we had a similar problem. So we didn't know it was removable until after the teardown, when people are like, hey, you just got to pull a little harder. And it does take a good tug to pull it out. And I would never suggest, yanking on a, cord that, feeds power to your device. But it is removable, and we just plugged it back in, and it's really hard to get back in. But if you just apply a lot of pressure and pop it back in, it does go back. But I know that Apple has, said, hey, don't do this. It could damage the device, because it's really the plug or the connection that they use is really solid, but it is removable. But maybe you should try to avoid it.
So it was designed to be removable, but Apple's telling you, but don't remove it.
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly.
That's so weird. Why would you do that?
So repairability score, what did it get?
So we gave it a 1 out of 10. And it wasn't because there was actually, a lot to love as far as repairability went on the inside of the HomePod. It was just the fact that the two things that caused us to give it a 1 was the adhesive. Battling the adhesive caused us to use the ultrasonic cutter to get inside. And because of that, we had to destroy it in the process. So if you're not designing these with this accessibility in mind, then all the repairability, good repairability aspects inside it don't really matter. But once you got past that, there were the whole thing is secured to prevent vibrations and rattling components. So there were probably like 30 different, crazy screws and stuff inside. And so but we like that. Screws are easy to remove, adhesive not so much. So once you got inside, it was very modular. It actually kind of reminded me of how the Echo or Echo Dot is stacked in like lots of layers. So easy to remove components that could be easily replaced if you could get inside. So that 1 out of 10 is definitely coming from the destructive process to get in. And that's a process that the consumer, even if we didn't make this documentation, somebody drops their HomePod and they wanted to try to fix it themselves, they would have to go through that process and they'd be breaking their, speaker when really they could just be, replacing a component. So
right.
That was it.
Interesting stuff. Love the teardowns that you guys do. Kelsea Weber from iFixIt.com. Thank you so much for joining us once again. It was great having you back.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, Kelsea.
Bye.
All right, up next, Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica is going to join us. He has the skinny on enjoying the Olympics in 4K. But first, let's take a minute to thank the sponsor of this episode, and that is Quip. When it comes to your health, brushing your teeth is one of the most important parts of your day. I know it is one of the most important parts of my day. Quip knows that, and they've combined dentistry and design to make a better electric toothbrush. Quip is the new electric toothbrush that packs just the right amount of vibration into a slimmer design at a fraction of the cost of bulkier traditional electric brushes. You can use Quip's 30-second guiding pulses, which are super handy to alert you when to switch areas. That makes sure that you're timed out on your brushing and all the teeth get the right amount of brushing. That makes brushing the right amount effortless. Quip also comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror and unsticks to use as a cover for hygienic travel anywhere you happen to go, whether it's going in your gym bag or your carry-on on your trip, wherever you happen to be going. There's no chargers or wires. Quip is compact and light. And because the thing that cleans your mouth should also be clean, Quip's subscription plan refreshes your brush on a dentist-recommended schedule, delivering new brush heads every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Not bad. Quip is backed by a network of over 10,000 dental professionals. Quip will even give you tips on oral care that you probably never knew before. And Quip's toothpaste tastes fresh, strengthens teeth, and gives your mouth the perfect minty clean feeling. That's what you're looking for at the end of a good toothbrushing. Most toothbrushes don't get named one of Time Magazine's best inventions of the year, but hey, what do you know? Quip did. Find out for yourself why. Quip starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/twit right now, you'll get your first refill pack free when you purchase any Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/twit. That's GETQUIP.com/twit. And we thank Quip for their support of Tech News Weekly.
If anything is meant to be watched in 4K, it's curling. I know we can all agree on that. Joining us to discuss how to watch the rest of this year's Winter Olympics in 4K is Sam Machkovech, culture editor at Ars Technica. Welcome back to the show, Sam.
Sorry, I'm practicing my sweet curling stroke.
I wouldn't even know how to do that.
I'm learning a little bit of the lingo. Unfortunately, the first thing you've already gotten wrong is that curling is not available in 4K. Oh. Neither is the luge, nor snowboarding, nor biathlon. The 4K options that are currently available for Olympic fans are pretty slim and narrow. I don't know where to begin because there's a lot to talk about, because watching the Olympics in 4K is already proving confusing. Everything I've dug into just to try and make it happen has been nothing short of a quagmire. It's gotten up and running. I'm able to watch stuff, and I've written about it at length at Ars Technica over the past week. But goodness, where do you want me to start?
I want to know why you're researching this so deeply. I know you said that this is sort of a test case, so talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. I am fascinated by 4K sports potential. When we talk about 4K, there's so much content where the difference is not very obvious. You'll slip on an old movie, sit down, and you go, I guess maybe there's more pixels. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't quite catch the eye with that quadrupling of pixels compared to 1080p. I believe sports is a major exception, especially when done right. There's just a lot of high-speed detail, a lot of players in team sports all on the screen at once doing a bunch of stuff. And I think it's just a great selling point for why we would need more pixels. Problem being, it's chicken and egg situation where there's not content because not a lot of people who own the right equipment to watch it. Not a lot of people are rushing out to buy screens and set-top boxes and game systems if there's not enough content, et cetera, et cetera. So seeing that the Olympics was going to be broadcast in 4K as announced and shouted by broadcasters such as Comcast got me interested and excited and hopeful that whatever they did put out there would be really cool and would sort of say, hey, if you've got all these pixels, we finally have something good for them.
So what exactly hardware are you going to need? Well, first of all, I know what I'm going to need. I'm going to need to upgrade my 1080i 50-inch rear projection LCD. It's going to happen sometime this year, I promise. At least I hope. Anyways, what kind of hardware are people going to need in order to really experience this? It's pretty limited,
Sure. The first thing is going to be a television that takes the 4K signal.
Okay.
Those are coming down in price. Basically, if you're buying a new TV that was made since the end of 2016, it's pretty much the same price for 4K as not 4K. The panels cost the same to make at this point. So there's that. Second is you're going to need a set-top box from a cable television or satellite television provider, at least for this Olympic Games. That's because OBS, one of the big Olympic committees handling all the broadcasts, handed everything off in the United States to Comcast. Comcast is the official broadcasting overseer of this Olympic Games, and they're only handing off the signal to companies like DirecTV, Dish Network, and other smaller broadcasters around the nation, which means a streaming app, a streaming box, a smart TV will not cut it. You're going to need to go to your provider and check with them that, one, they have a 4K-friendly set-top box, and two, that they're going to pipe in any Olympics content. And then from that point, just making sure you have all the cables that are 4K ready and things like that. This does not require an Xbox or a Roku or a smart TV. You're going to need that set-top box from your cable or satellite provider.
So your first piece on this last week, you said you couldn't watch it, but then now you can. You approached Comcast as a consumer. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, I put on my customer hat, called up, and played a little dumb after having Googled some stuff and found that I'm supposed to be able to get 4K, just to see what the heck they would say to someone interested in but slightly confused by the 4K ecosystem. The 38 minutes of bouncing from rep to rep and having somebody ask me about this 4D TV I was asking about was not very confidence inspiring. And by the end of the call, I finally got bounced to a manager, very polite and helpful, except when at the end of the call, he said to me that my regional network didn't support 4K TV. I asked him multiple times to confirm that he was saying this was Comcast in Seattle, Washington. He goes, yeah, regional network can't support it. Once I contacted Comcast with the journalist hat on, right after the article went live, actually, it was about 24 hours between my request and their response. They said, oh, yeah, we have 4K television anywhere that we serve TV. This person told you the wrong thing, and we don't have an answer as to why this manager at the top of a customer service chain told you that. And this was just Comcast. I don't know that DirecTV or Dish Network are as bad. I know there's been a lot of stuff on their forums that's a mix of good and confusing information. So the mileage can vary in whichever direction. But I've got a Comcast box running. There's an Ars Technica article up today about the further confusion about even finding the 4K content once I got that installed. It actually, most of their online help stuff gives you bad or incomplete information. I had to get help from tweeting at Comcast. They linked me to an article whose advice no longer exists. The thing that I do now is I simply say to my little voice-controlled remote, show me 4K Olympics. You can't find that advice at Comcast's help site anymore. It's very strange.
That is, but it makes so much sense if you've ever had Comcast. So talk a little bit about how it looks, the quality. Like, do you feel like you're looking through a window and, hey, on the other side of that window is the Olympics?
To some extent, yes. I would say that there is just enough payoff where I don't feel completely ridiculous for having done this for multiple days. That being said, I don't blame anybody for looking at it and perhaps shrugging their shoulders, but I went and did my best to post images that really proved out the stuff that I thought was cool and the limitations over at Ars Technica. The short version is you will get 4K content. And I love saying this, it sounds so silly, but it's the sparkles in figure skating that really are the beginning of this conversation. Now, when you take a wide field view of a giant figure skating rink, you have a lot of detail that will go missed if you're just watching on a normal broadcast television. That absolutely pops when the camera crew is getting focus and attention on the right elements of a skating routine or of short track or of other sports. That being said, those really awesome details that pop when the focus is right aren't all the time. Sometimes the focus isn't good. Sometimes you've got motion blur, but the camera equipment is very good. The issue really is limited sports, like I said at the top. If you want to watch snowboarding, if you want to watch Shaun White kick butt, that's not a 4K option. And if you want to watch 4K sports, you're sitting on no less than 8 hours, perhaps as many as 24 hours between that game playing and it showing up in your 4K feed. Only this morning did hockey pop up in my feed, and hockey has been going. But not in 4K. It only finally came out. That's an issue with OBS and their Japanese broadcasting partner who are doing the production. That's happening all over the world in terms of this 4K stuff. So that's not just Comcast or DirecTV or anything like that. But it's just a whole bunch of asterisks and pitfalls and garbage getting in the way of some really impressive, super pristine detail. When I'm watching hockey, when I'm watching short track or the ski jump or figure skating, it's phenomenal stuff. It makes me go, yes, I want more 4K sports.
So what have you learned on this journey, this hero's journey you've taken to get 4K Olympics? What have you learned about the future of 4K television?
Well, to learn the future of 4K television, you've got to just look at the past. You look at the 1080p transition, which itself had its old weird thing of we really only got 720p and 1080i for television broadcast stuff. I think we've got a lot of potential fragmentation coming between which content providers give us that 4K stuff on which devices. Are you going to need an Apple TV or a Roku or a smart TV app? Are you going to need a set-top box? Is there going to be a net neutrality kerfuffle in terms of, oh, if you want to watch 4K sports, they don't count to your bandwidth cap if you watch them through this or that? I don't think the conversation is going to be super smooth and simple, and I really do think it's going to take sports and the fandom that sports fans are willing to invest in, both in terms of hardware and money, to say, okay, this is worth the trouble. I think that's how it's going to start, is you're going to see more 4K sports rolling out. I know DirecTV has a dedicated 4K sports channel, and they've got more than a few, over a dozen NBA games this season have already played in 4K on that. That's going to continue with Major League Baseball. And I really think the NFL, there's been talk about ratings not being so great last season. Maybe they can jump on that bandwagon, get all the cameras upgraded, get everything going there, and have something that's smooth and gets people excited, and have that be a positive headline for the NFL instead of some negative ones that have been around. So I think it's just historically transitions to a new TV standard have always had a little bit of a bump, but they come through as prices come down and access goes up.
Sam, thank you, as always, for joining us. Sam Machkovech is the culture editor at Ars Technica, and he can be found on Twitter. He is Sam Red. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, I'm going back to my curling practice. See you guys.
All right. Get to it.
And finally, it's time for our segment called Fun with Facebook.
Oh.
The Daily Beast reports that people have been able to thwart Facebook's video-loving algorithm by posting spammy memes with floating things all over them in order to trick Facebook into thinking that the photo is really a video. Also, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
BuzzFeed says they were able to keep a post on top of, one BuzzFeed writer was able to keep a post on top of her friend's Facebook feed. All she had to do was share a video of a white woman showing people around her boring apartment in Brooklyn. And because the BuzzFeed author's post was so annoying, all of her friends commented on how annoying it was, therefore making it stay on top of people's feeds because of all the comments. Don't you miss Facebook?
No, I really don't. I log into it every once in a while to just like, I don't know why, because I get this little notification. Apparently I'm logged into it on my laptop at home. But but I don't check it on a regular basis. But I have noticed that when I do, like my feed it's like a barren wasteland. Almost everything that's in there is from like weeks ago. And I think at this point I've confused Facebook's algorithms enough by not being present on Facebook anymore that it just doesn't know what to show me anymore.
Yeah,
so it's like, here's a bunch of stuff you've already seen.
Facebook knows you're gone.
Yes.
Well,
it doesn't care about me anymore, so I don't care about it.
Well, as I said earlier in the show, I asked, I put a post on Facebook. I'm going to be interviewing this doctor who wrote the screen time regulations, and does anyone have any questions? And lots of people had questions. And then I realized, oh yeah, that's what this is probably showing up at the top of people's feeds because there's so many questions.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean it to, it's like that's one thing that people can game the algorithm by, like, what's your favorite color? And there's lots of comments.
Right.
But yeah, it is interesting what people see and what you don't see. I've basically been trying to stay away, but I felt like this was a good reason to go back to, because I know that a lot of people who are my Facebook friends are interested in those kinds of things.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny yesterday. Last night as we were sitting around watching the Olympics, my wife mentioned something about, you're going to have a doctor on tomorrow's show, right? It was just one of those moments because let's face it, my wife probably does not watch a lot of technology content when she's driving. She's got other stuff that she listens to and watches. So it was a weird disconnect where it was like, wait a minute, how did you know that?
Like you're at the
because
secret
she saw
life.
Yes, exactly, because she saw your post and she was like, actually, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So she's probably going to check it out.
There we go.
So okay, but it's an animated GIF, right?
No, it's just a spammy meme. It's just Adele, but someone has added a layer.
Okay. I mean, it's via Jiffy.
Oh, you mean they created a GIF or a GIF?
But it's tricking the Facebook algorithm into thinking it's actually a
video, so it'll show up higher.
You'd think that Facebook would actually know the difference between an animated GIF and a video.
I don't know. Well, I know
knows?
when I'm gonna post. I'm gonna start using those little things. It feels like a floater, like when you have something stuck in your eye. Like,
get it out of there, Adele. You've got something on you. Here, let's get it off. Tech News Weekly. We record live every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific. You can be part of the show always by sending us an email. We love getting emails from you guys on the topics that we discuss on this show. Just send that to tnw@twit.tv.
Subscribe to our show at twit.tv/TNW. And if you want to tweet at me, I'm at Megan Maroney. Other things we're supposed to tell you is our flash briefing is now live in many other countries besides the United States. So sign up for that if you have an Amazon Echo. Put us in your flash briefing. Put us first because we're very important.
Yeah, we're probably the most important thing you'll hear at the very start of your day. You can also find our Twit survey, twit.tv/survey. Want to hear from you to know how you're enjoying the content that we provide, what we could do better, anything, as much or as little as you want to share. Twit.tv/survey, and that informs how we continue to provide you content that you want to see. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who helps out here. Burke, thanks to Alex for being our TD today. Thanks to Jammer B, everyone who helps, and thanks to you for talking with us today, or at least sharing your time with us on Tech News Weekly. We'll see y'all next week. Bye, everybody. Oh.